All right, that takes a big worry off of my shoulders.
Oh,
We've got it. I won't have to face the wrath of Molly or Chris. Okay. Um, well, you're all kind of, oh, Rosemary, that's good. You're
making
getting the
my milk
last,
here.
that's good. Last of lunch going, going down.
Yeah.
I'm still just finishing up the morning pot of coffee out here in Mountain Time.
Well, I'm in Toronto, so I'm on Eastern.
Oh, yeah, yeah,
So it's lunchtime. It's 12:15 here.
sure, sure.
And I'm at 5:14 in the afternoon, so my next beverage of choice is going to be a glass of New Zealand Sauvignon Blanc. So
Oh, so nice.
Oh,
So
very nice.
nice.
not during the session, I hasten to add, but
Oh, it's wonderful. I mean, and the Zoom has been fabulous.
yeah,
You know, I've made friends all over the world.
yeah,
You
yeah.
know, I've joined people in the UK and California. I join them every week. It's just marvelous. Yeah.
Well, you know what? It's the magic hour. It is a quarter after. And Dorta, hey, I thought you might be joining this conversation. Well, I tell you what, to begin, I'd encourage us all to turn on our cameras just to say hello, and um, uh, then we can I'll leave you to your own devices as we go. I'd like to begin our session by giving a brief introduction to Coral. Uh, and I want to give this a little bit of a context. So everything you need to know about Coral can be summarized in three words: pragmatic, curious, and immensely passionate. Growing up on a New Zealand dairy farm, she developed a pragmatic number eight wire mentality. What's that? It's a resourceful, hands-on problem-solving approach that is also reflected in her company's name, 8 Innovation. Her curiosity led her from a background in marketing and Mandarin to living and working in China for 7 years, then on to innovation consulting in the UK. Seeking deeper insight into how our brains work when we think creatively, she earned a master's degree focused on the neuroscience of creativity in 2023. And that is where I met Coral as her master's project advisor. Coral is immensely passionate about delivering high impact results for clients and continuing to learn, speak, and write on the power of neuroscience and creativity to get big, bold, breakthrough ideas every time. Would you all join me in giving Coral a warm welcome? Welcome, Coral. Thank you so much.
Thanks, everyone. Thanks, Blair.
Now, Coral, to get us off, I just to give us a little orientation, what provoked your interest in the neuroscience of creativity?
Look, that's an excellent question and relevant in like what we're looking at today. So, look, I've worked in innovation consulting for the last 15 years, and I know there's bound to be a heap of practitioners joining us in today's conversation. And in that time, I've worked with CPG, finance, pharmaceutical companies on innovation challenges that are strategically important. They're global, and they've got two dimensions. And I think those two dimensions are particularly important. One is
everyone. It's nice to have you here.
I think we might
I
just.
think you need to mute everybody,
Yeah,
Blair.
could
You
you
need to
put
mute
Yeah.
yourself
everybody.
on
I
mute,
will,
Lily?
I will mute everybody's,
Wonderful. Okay, thank you. So look, and those challenges have two dimensions. One is getting to breakthrough ideas, the obvious. But the second dimension is always working with clients where there's a task to do around alignment, instilling a creativity mindset, ownership and buy-in. So there's that really, really important human dimension. And, you know, in the work I was doing, probably like most of you, I was getting clients to really good results, but I wanted to do an even better job of helping people play their creative A game. And Gerard's comment today really resonated for me. If you have theory without practice, the risk is you're impractical. If you've got practice without theory, the risk is you're superficial. And so I decided to go to the source. And the source, my friends, of course, is Buffalo. So that led me to embarking on a master's in science focused, of course, on neuroscience. And look, there were three big drivers there. One is, I think, the fact that we've got to face into is that creativity just simply isn't well understood in a corporate environment. And we could beat around the bush on that, but honestly, and I can see a few people, Shelley, I can see you nodding. And I think it's really important we face into that, not to make people feel bad, but simply to acknowledge that there's an opportunity to do a much better job. And there was a really interesting article in Forbes last year which talked about the fact that 96% of companies said they knew they needed creative ideas to drive growth. And I'd love your thoughts, either sing out or pop it in chat. What percentage of companies do you think felt like they were doing a good job of harnessing creativity? Don't be shy. 5% from Shelley. Yeah. It's. I think go up a little bit, but I like the intention. Any other thoughts? 5. We're up at 15. Yeah. That's moving in the right direction. 10. I'd go up a little bit. 33. We'll average all of those out, and we probably end up at the number which is about 22%. So what I think is really interesting about that, 96% of people say they know they need creative ideas to drive growth. 22% are saying we're doing a good job of harnessing creativity. So I think when you add to that the cost, and I see it every day, I'm sure you do too, of bad ideas. So either really dull ideas that have been generated that people look at and go, crikey, is that the best we can do? You know, and that's the internal reaction, let alone what consumers might think. Or at the other end of the spectrum, completely, I'm rather fond of the expression doolally, completely doolally, off the wall, aimless ideas that are off strategy. And when you look at the cost of those ideas, the direct costs, so time, resources, headspace, absolutely alarming. When you add then the indirect cost to that, so thinking about how much it costs to resuscitate ideas that were pretty mediocre to begin with, or that need extra executional investment. And then there's a third dimension, which is the opportunity cost, the space that those dull or doolally ideas take up that could be otherwise occupied by a big, bold, brave breakthrough idea that's genuinely going to drive growth. And then the third dimension I'd offer to that is that really made me return to first principles and say, what is it we're seeking to achieve with front-end innovation? And, you know, ultimately, it's about getting to breakthrough ideas. I deliberately use the word breakthrough because it gives you a little bit of latitude. That will differ in terms of what it looks like for perhaps different brands, different categories, industries, projects for that matter. But we want to get to breakthrough ideas. We know to get to breakthrough ideas, we need new connections. And I think on new connections, there's a couple of dimensions. There's the new connections we know we need to create across ideas or domains or different fields of knowledge to actually create something new. But I think there's also that element of human connection, alignment and buy-in and ownership and having the difficult conversations that's really important there. And I think that second dimension of connection is especially important when we consider AI might be helping us do more of the heavy lifting with the first kind of connection. And we might talk a bit more on that later. So we know we need to get to new connections. We know we need to break through business as usual thinking to get there. So the way we're making decisions, the way we're showing up, the way we're thinking for operational decisions is not what we need for the creative journey. And finally, for me, the unlocker there was, hey, if we could better understand the way our brains work when we're thinking creatively, that would really allow us to unlock the power of creativity. So, Blair, I rather suspect I've given you a much more thorough answer than you could have imagined, but that was the genesis for why neuroscience. And Blair, I think you might be muted.
I am indeed. Coral, so a lot's happened in the year or so that you and I were doing work on your original 2023 model, which in itself had evolved quite a bit. And in light of the incredible keynote we had this morning with Dr. Kim, which just seemed to be a real magnet for your talk here, I wonder if you could briefly review the 2023 model and where you have evolved it. And I imagine you have some slides that you could share with that. And a reminder, as we're going through, put questions or observations in your chat, and I'll monitor that. Then when we have questions, I'll toss those out to you.
Thanks, Blair. An excellent prompt. Actually, I do have a few slides up my sleeve, so I'll pop those on screen. So let me just pop those on full screen for you. Amazing. So look, the 2023 model I got to, which, and I'm sure, many of you who've been through the Buffalo program or, worked on similar pieces of research, in May 2023, this was perhaps one of the most beautiful things I could imagine in the world. And not to say it's not without its flaws, but very briefly, I'm not going to go through this in depth, but the model I'd created had 5 areas of focus, which were in the inside ring. So, and I'll read those out just so you've got those in mind. Engaging metacognition and the creative process, activating creative drive, shifting perspective to gain insight, deploying to focused attention, and sparking remote connections. And then for each of those areas, what I'd done was mapped out the key pieces of evidence from neuroscience, and that's the next ring of the model. And then in the outer ring, for each of those pieces of evidence, I've mapped out practical implications supported by things that you could actually do to put those learnings into practice. Now, standing back in the cold, harsh light of day later on in the year in 23 and in 24, a few things to note about the model. So, I needed some clarity of scope. Otherwise, I would have happily kept researching this for years and years and years. And I can see Blair nodding to that. So initially, I focused this on divergent thinking only. The second thing to note is, and I particularly call this out, I guess, with an eye to thinking about how we partner with AI on innovation journeys, is that the focus is all about human creativity. So creating ideas, the mindset we want people in, ownership. And, I think there's definitely potential to evolve that further. It's also focused on an end objective of getting to consumer viable ideas that clients could then put into their own internal innovation NPD funnels and processes. And, you know, I think, and this is sort of phrased very euphemistically, there's definitely an opportunity to make this easier to communicate. There's a lot here. Blair referred to this when we were speaking a week or so ago as a mandala. It actually, that stuck in my mind. It does remind me. I can see Rosemary's going, yeah, I see that. I see that. So that was the start point. So with those things in mind, and, you know, this was particularly relevant as I thought about how I evolved the model so it was easier to communicate to clients, to explain the why of what we were doing and how that would elevate their thinking over the creative process. So let's take a look at how that's evolved. So the neuroscience of creativity model we've got to in 2025, and I always introduce this as being a very happy marriage of practical experience running strategic innovation work married with the work on the neuroscience of creativity. And there are three key principles, and I deliberately call these principles because they apply to a lesser or a greater extent across most of the front-end innovation journey. The first of those is peak creative headspace. The second is novel and inspiring connections. And the third is breakthrough decision-making. And so to briefly explain each of those areas, peak creative headspace is about reimagining the content, the pace, the stimulus to elevate mood and enhance creative capacity and begin germinating ideas, you know, even before workshops begin. The second principle is all about creating novel and inspiring connections. And that's about supercharging novelty to stimulate dopamine and new neural connections to maximize cognitive flexibility and persistence and therefore creative output. And then the third principle, breakthrough decision-making, you know, this applies not only at the point where you're starting to pivot into prioritizing ideas, but starts at the very beginning of the journey at key decision points, ensuring that we're doing the best possible job we can to mitigate decision-making bias and give big ideas the space they need to develop, you know, much like a newborn foal, until they're going to be strong enough to stand on their own 2 feet and thrive. And so for each of these principles, they are supported by activators that bring them alive. So I'll briefly pop those up. So in peak creative headspace, that's about creative focus. It's about reimagining the journey and motivation and mood. For novel and inspiring connections, that's about building divergent thinking muscles and capability, no surprises, shifting and broadening perspective, but all of that supported by delivering a dopamine fix in the right quantities, in the right places. And finally, when we start talking about breakthrough decision-making, which in the spirit of full transparency is a principle that's still under a bit of development, but definitely overcoming decision-making biases, which I'll talk about in a bit, newness and intrigue and maintaining a future focus. And so, you know, the neuroscience of creativity model is so pivotal to the work we're doing with clients that at the outset of every project, we run a neuroscience of creativity audit so we can then dial up, or if it's the case, dial down aspects of the model and what we're paying attention to based on the needs of that team, brand, project, organizational culture. The other thing to call out is, you know, the power of the model, probably as with most models, is in applying it in an integrated fashion. Because, you know, I think it's very easy to look at a lot of these things, and sometimes clients do and say, oh, yeah, I read an article on dopamine last week. And look, that's absolutely brilliant. But it's about more than just dopamine or more than just reimagining the journey. So what I thought I'd do is just give you an example of one of the activators. I think I mentioned, the reason we call them activators is because we take action on these things. This is deliberately designed to be a very practical model. So let's take a look. I've selected one in advance for you, so I hope you like my choice. I've told you actually I selected creative focus, but that's a lie. I have selected the dopamine fix. So let's take a look at that. I hope no one's disappointed. I can hook you up with a creative focus another day, I promise. Dorothy, thank you. You're obviously keen on this, so that's lovely. Okay, so I think what's really interesting about a dopamine fix, and one of the first things to call out here is, anyone who says, wow, we want people really hyped up the whole time, we want a frenzy of high-fiving awesomeness for 2 days, is not really someone we want on the team. That's a bit much. You can have too much dopamine, and that's going to, of course, cognitively exhaust people and not have them in the relaxed and expansive headspace that we want them in. And, a comment that I find is often overheard, either with clients or their senior stakeholders, is people saying, well, look, the team should just really be excited enough. It's part of their job. That should mean, they're bringing their whole selves to the gig. Now, I think if we take a step back, reflecting on an article that was in Marketing Week magazine in the UK 2 weeks ago, that said that the majority, so over 50% of UK marketers, my suspicion would be this doesn't differ across a lot of countries, that the majority felt both undervalued and overworked. And so, again, I think it's really important we acknowledge people's start point. Continual rounds of restructuring mean that probably people are doing the job they had a year or two ago, and maybe 2/3 of someone else's job as well. So I think it's really important we remember a front-end innovation journey is a battle for people's hearts and minds. So if we look at some of the evidence from neuroscience, we know that dopamine stimulates new neural connections. So, already that's quite interesting for us, given we said this game is all about stimulating new connections. And we know that novelty stimulates dopamine. So that's something interesting we'll pick up on in a bit. The second thing to call out is a sense of progress fuels dopamine. And many of you may have read some of the work of Dr. Teresa Amabile on the progress principle, which certainly resonates. And I think this final point is super interesting, that dopamine increases with rewards. It increases further still with the anticipation of a reward, so maybe much like a holiday. And increases further still with unexpected rewards. So, okay, lots of good stuff there to work with. Let's take a look at how we can apply it practically and ultimately innovate smarter. So I think the first point there is around, or certainly how we activate this, is around dialing up novelty across the entire front-end innovation journey. The way the journey's structured, the capability builds we add into that journey, the creative stimulus that we're using to really stretch people's thinking beyond business as usual, modes of working, the tools we use, even the creative resets and immediate incubation tools that we're using to give people brain breaks and opportunities to incubate in between sessions. So the second thing specifically we do there is we deliberately create momentum and celebrate success throughout the journey. And, I think that's particularly important because in this overworked environment everyone finds themselves in, I often find, and I suspect your observations might be very similar, that there's a tendency for clients sometimes to say, Right, guys, let's just crack on. We've got truckloads of work to do here. You've got thousands of email messages in your inbox. We've got so much work to do. Let's carry on. And why don't we extend this session for 2 or 3 hours so it ends really late? Now, I exaggerate slightly, but you get where I'm coming from. So, I think it's just so important. We're saying to teams, here's the journey we're going on. Relax. We've got your back on this. We're giving you everything you need to succeed, and we're going to make every single minute count. Here's what our journey looks like, and celebrating when we get to each juncture and saying well done. And we know from the progress principle that for people to be engaged in meaningful work is immensely motivating. And also, I think it means we don't lose sight of joy. And I've deliberately put this quote on screen so I don't lose sight of joy as well, because I particularly like this. And this is a quote from Fink and friends. The most important motivator for creative thought is the joy of discovery. And, we are the agents of joy as people who are helping clients solve these creative problems they're confronted with. I was on a call with a client today, and we were talking about his aspirations for a session we're planning in a few weeks. And he was saying to his team, guys, let's not forget, this is the good stuff, right, that we're working on here. This is the reason we want to be marketers, is that we're creating something new. Let's not forget that. Now, finally, there's a point here about rewards. And I think, the point to me about rewards and playfulness is that we're wanting to encourage a childlike sense of playfulness and wonder, not a childish sense of wonder. Because I don't know about you, the only time I want to feel like I'm at a 5-year-old's birthday party is if I'm actually at a 5-year-old's birthday party. When I'm at an innovation workshop, not so much, thanks. And I think that's worth noting, because I think sometimes people get a bit confused and sort of make things a bit too childish there. Rosemary, looks like you've got a question.
So again, going back to the keynote yesterday,
Yeah.
fake cup of coffee, virtual fake cup of coffee worked
Yes.
as a reward.
Yeah.
Excuse me?
Exactly.
It's fascinating, isn't it? How our brain works. It gets so tricked so easily. But anyway, I just thought it was an interesting one to bring up because that blew me away.
You're right.
Because I feel that was being, trying to pull the wool over somebody's eyes or cheating, or you know what I mean? Because it's fake.
Yeah.
No, our brain likes it.
I think I'm so pleased you brought this up, because I think, when I think about the sorts of rewards that we tend to offer, and they're things like dialing up the fact we're jumping into some multisensorial stimulus, or we've got a really provocative or interesting speaker, or maybe as one of our creative resets, we've got one of my favorites, bit of a sneaky silent disco coming up where, people can relax and kick back. But with I always make sure I'm explaining, particularly for the playful rewards, we're not doing it because it's a mindless energizer, which it's probably quite obvious I'm not a fan of energizers without purpose, because I think you can be really smart and have energizers with purpose. And when we explain to people, why it's beneficial to be more playful and how it will contribute to their creativity, I find that people are very open to deliberately being a bit more playful. So thank you. That was a great catalyst to sort of expand that a bit. So this is an example of the dopamine fix. I think something I promised I'd reflect on, and I know we titled the session today on the science of the aha moment. Dr. Kim showed us that there are so many dimensions or parallels to the aha moment today, which I thought was absolutely lovely. And you know, that was a title that I chose deliberately to be provocative, because we all know this is about so much more than just an aha moment. I think my observation would be that clients often fetishize the aha moment or ideation, and when we're thinking about front-end innovation, it's the whole journey that's really, really important to ensure that we get to really, really impactful results. So look, with that in mind, I have a suspicion that if divergent thinking and convergent thinking were children, and I don't have any children, right? So people with children might tell me I'm misdirected here. But if they were children, divergent thinking would be kind of fun, easy to chat to, really open, quite easy to like. I have a suspicion that maybe convergent thinking as a child might be a little bit more reserved, standoffish, quite thoughtful, you know, a little more difficult to get to know initially. Both great kids, but quite different personalities. And so maybe because of that, you know, I took the easy route, and I'd focused initially on divergent thinking. I've come more through my creativity practice to really appreciate the importance of doing a stellar job on convergent thinking and really helping clients navigate some of those key decision-making biases that get in the way. And that was why, you know, I made the decision to add convergent thinking, or some of the more convergent thinking adjacent skills, into the model. And actually, I'll show you where we got to, perhaps on overcoming decision-making bias, because I think that's quite interesting. So in the area of overcoming decision-making bias, you know, certainly a comment I overhear from clients quite often is, look, Coral, seriously, we make decisions every day. How hard can it be? And I think my earlier point applies here, that the way that people are showing up, the way that they're thinking, the way that they're making decisions for business as usual operational decisions, isn't necessarily the way we want them to show up, think, and make decisions when we're thinking creatively. So there is a bit of a need to, I think, build capability and reset behaviours. And so what I often find it useful to talk to clients about are three particular biases, which, look, I'm sure you'll all be familiar with. But to start with, groupthink and the tendency of a group to end up furiously agreeing with each other and losing the diversity of thought, which was the reason maybe we put together that group of people in the first place. And I think, you know, a couple of adaptations on groupthink is when everyone ends up just agreeing with the loudest voice, when everyone ends up agreeing with the senior stakeholder. So, you know, obviously there's work we can do there. Status quo bias, I think, also incredibly relevant in that, you know, we know our brains have a tendency to want the most cognitively efficient route to getting to a decision, a polite way of saying they can be lazy. And, you know, we like the things that are safer and more familiar. They're easier for us. We don't need to expend a lot of cognitive energy. Now, that's a colossal problem when our objective is getting to breakthrough ideas. We want the polar opposite of the status quo bias. And finally, considering loss aversion, where we know that we overweight the short-term loss as compared to the benefit of a long-term gain. So some of the ways I explain to clients how we overcome those particular biases are as follows. So the first is not only, and I talk a lot when I'm explaining the model about using hybrid ideation to make sure we're using both individual and group ideation. And I do the same thing in decision making, giving people space and time to do some deep thinking themselves, so they have a clear point of view to bring into decision making, which particularly people with introverted tendencies say they really, really appreciate, because it means when you get to that group discussion that you actually have, 4 or 5 people with well-formed views to debate and discuss. So that discipline of individual first, then group, I find to be very, very impactful. The second thing to call out is I often find, and I'm sure others see this as well, that in overcoming the status quo bias, people often try and overcomplicate the criteria to prioritize big, bold, brave ideas. And the ultimate security blanket I've discovered is a 9-grid matrix. That apparently can solve any issue. And while a simple matrix might help, I think the watch out is we're not creating spurious degrees of accuracy for what is at this juncture, in some ways a subjective decision. But it's about choosing big, scalable ideas that are bold and differentiated, and they're brave. They're taking us to a new place. There's a gut judgment attached to that. And I think it's really interesting when you chat to ChatGPT, as I do, as I'm sure you do, and ask ChatGPT for its take on the importance of humans in the creative process. One of the things ChatGPT called out was our ability to make creative decision-making leaps. And I think it's so important we don't lose sight of that. And, if we've not got the right people in the room to make those creative leaps, we've not got the right people in the room. So, we really need to think about who we've got in the room. And a final point to call out is, look, ultimately it's going to be really important to consider feasibility. I'm not saying it's not, but the watch out is that we're not trying to prioritize which are the biggest, boldest, bravest ideas. Given that already at the outset of their project, we would have a clearly defined what's on strategy, that we're doing a good job of prioritizing first and then giving those ideas some space to be developed before we assess feasibility. So I think not prematurely assessing feasibility is absolutely vital. And that's why, I think overcoming decision-making bias and this whole area of breakthrough decision-making, I'm really delighted that's been added into the model, because I think it really, really strengthens it. So the next question really is I'll pass back to Blair for your questions and thoughts. Blair, I think you've been
you actually have it right on the slide there.
Yeah.
Let's open up for questions or reflections. We can put thoughts in the chat, or we just have a few minutes left. So I think if you want to unmute, I'm being the poster child for forgetting to do that. We could just popcorn any questions or reflections you have for the group or to Coral. Rosemary?
So one of the big challenges I've found, unless people feel safe, they are not going to contribute.
Yeah.
And that's the challenge, is first of all, making sure everybody feels safe.
Yeah.
Because they'll say, oh, yes, 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 but they may not. And really, and that may be part of why that complete anonymity was creating safety. Yeah.
I think, look, it's such a great point. And the creative focus area that I had circled misleadingly, as it turned out, in that what we're exploring is, number one, figuring out where we're actually going to focus innovation in the first place and making sure we're really clear about what's on strategy, ensuring that that's backed up with stakeholder alignment and understanding some of the baggage, Rosemary, to your point, that stakeholders are taking into that process, often what comes out of that is people are saying, I'm petrified. This is going to be just another off-strategy innovation journey. I hasten to add, at that point, I've not worked with them before. And that then creates psychological safety, in that people have certainty about the fact that we have structured innovation territories and areas of focus and a journey that will get them to on-strategy thinking, as well as setting the expectation for them, because creativity is so poorly understood often, that actually it is a smart tool we can use to strategically elevate thinking. Those things, I find, give people a sense of psychological safety. And also, it's, and I'm sure you share this observation, it's not about creating that state once, it's about constantly reinforcing it over the journey. But I agree, it's just absolutely vital. It must be the start point.
There's a question here from Shelley around what criteria have you seen as useful for big, bold, and brave ideas? She says she can relate, it's many of us, to that the groupthink and status quo.
And look, it's a really great question. I've found the most resonant criteria, and you might say, Coral, sorry, you're oversimplifying here, but I've found it to work incredibly well, is that it's about big ideas. So, and the way I explain that to people is they need to be scalable, and they need to be meeting, what is an important unmet consumer need. They need to be bold, so they're differentiated. So far we've got a relevant idea, we've got a differentiated idea, and they need to be brave. They need to be the kind of thing that you're looking at and thinking, oh, that feels a little bit uncomfortable. And honestly, at the first pass prioritization, so I'm talking about where we'd get to in a workshop with a broader group of stakeholders for the kinds of projects I'm running, that's normally about 20, 25 people, to get to a first pass of prioritization of ideas that gets us to where we need to go. And then following the workshop, the smaller core team will then look at those ideas and check that they're on strategy, there's no duplications, all of that good stuff. But the big, bold, brave. And what I've found helps with that is a senior leader in the business who understands the creative process well enough to stand up there and say, guys, I'm not going to give you a matrix. This is not a matrix exercise. I need you as leaders of the business to tap into your commercial judgment, your knowledge of the industry, and I need you to take a creative leap. And the combination of big, bold, brave, and that endorsement by a senior leader, I find works really well to get people in the right headspace.
Excellent. Anthony?
Yeah, I just early on when you were talking about the 2023 model, and you mentioned that one of the objectives was consumer viable ideas, and I was thinking about that sometimes things are not always about consumerism, and sometimes like say corporate clients might be really focused on the short term and what's going to happen in the next quarter or the next couple quarters, as opposed to perhaps the long term. Or if you're working in a realm of thought such as the delivery of social services or something like that, that the rewards structure might be different for the client and for the group. And I don't know what your thoughts are about that.
That's an interesting question. I think that so to me, when I'm saying consumer viable too, I guess what I'm meaning is it's viable in the sense that the consumer or the end user of the service, and you're right, that could be business to consumer. In some cases, it's business to business, so you might be thinking about the service provider, but ensuring that we're meeting an unmet need that they've got at that juncture. So that's what I mean by consumer or customer or viable. And so I guess, you know, you could that same logic would travel quite happily to the delivery of social services and thinking about perhaps end users in that context too. And, you know, whether it's a short-term, medium-term, long-term need, again, I think, you know, that criteria or that framing would travel. Yeah. Thanks, Anthony.
Thank you.
Pleasure.
We have just a little bit, a couple of minutes. Are there any other questions? I put Carl's slides into the chat, so if you'd like those, see that. Carl, in a couple of minutes, have just to build on that AI conversation, do you have any connections or thoughts you've had for how AI fits in, or how you've been using AI with the model?
Look, it's a very, very timely question. I was saying to Blair how much I enjoyed Mike Amaris's session yesterday on practical applications of AI. Look, what we've been finding is there's an expectation from clients and also from, you know, our end too. We want to be exploring different AI tools, to be deploying AI across the journey. So whether it's looking at first thoughts on opportunity spaces, whether it's ideation tools that we're using, sometimes, you know, helping with concept crafting and visualizing ideas. Yeah, it's already an inherent part of the way we work. And of course, you know, behind the scenes in terms of productivity, and more to come.
Excellent. Well, Coral, I think I speak for everybody to thank you very much for your thoughts and sharing this model. Here's just another example from the program of going from your interests and getting that background and having that gestate and manifest into some real contributions for the field as a whole. So thank you for sharing your current thoughts. I know your original model really got a lot of thoughts for me, and I love where you're going with this. It's really expanding my understanding and applications of neuroscience. I believe we have a closing happening in about 15 minutes. So let's just give a final round of applause to Coral, and we'll let you go. Thank you very much.
Thank you. And thank you so much for joining. I appreciate you had a choice of airlines. So thanks for choosing to spend the time with us. And Blair, thank you. Really, really appreciate you hosting today.
My pleasure.
Take care.
Take care. Bye-bye.
Bye. Blair,
well,
thank you.
Dr. Macker, your ears must have been burning because you were mentioned in a positive light by Carl just a couple of months ago.
Well,
I joined your session yesterday, and I was saying to Blair how much I'd enjoyed it and how thought-provoking it was. So there you go.
Oh, very good. I was torn between sessions today, and then I was running around the house, so I was going to try and time slice a couple of them. So I'm just make sure to catch the recording.
Oh, well, the intention is appreciated. Thank you. Blair, thank you.
Speaking of which, I'm going to stop the recording.